So we've been talking a lot about Christian nationalism and evangelicalism. It's important for both people inside the United States and outside the United States to understand that what we're talking about is new. It's not only new, it's different from the way those words are used outside the United States. Now, I've talked before about how I was raised in this evangelical Christian nationalist cult, that I grew up with a lot of the language that we're now seeing in our politics as a part of our church services. It's important for us to realize, remember, and maybe to help people who, like me, 20, 30 years ago, before I escaped this, it really is a cult to see their way out. Because my way out involved actually studying church history and realizing that what I was taught wasn't what it promised to be. Because I did go to a private Christian school for a while. In Sunday school and in church, the Christianity delivered once and for all to the saints. But something new that really took root in the United States starting in the 1800s and really flowered into something bizarre and twisted by the 1980s that then gave us what we have today. So this is important if we're going to be able to combat this rise of Christian nationalism, to understand what it is. Because if we don't know what it is, we're not going to be able to fight it effectively. So let's continue our discussion on this new weird American thing that it calls itself Christianity today as we walk together down Creation's paths. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie. I am a Christopagan druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Christopagan druid and sous chef to the dog.
Today, we're going to be continuing our discussion, but we're going to be doing it differently today. We are going to be using a Wisecrack video on American Christianity, and we're going to be reacting to it, adding to and building on what's there. This is a big topic. And before we get into all that, and before I do my normal spiel, I feel that I can't stress enough how important this is. When we go after this form of Christianity in terms of it being a Christianity like you would have found in Europe, or even existing in some pockets still in the United States, and we're not careful to discern the differences and go after them, it actually has the possibility of radicalizing non-evangelical, non-Christian nationalists over to their side. That's why this is really important for us to understand these things and to be able to differentiate between more garden variety Christianity and this weed that has gotten into the field that is trying to take over the entire field. Because if we were going to uproot it and throw it into the threshing fire, as Jesus taught us to do, we're going to have to be careful not to convince the people that could potentially be on our side, our potential allies, to run over to the Christian right. And we've been very bad at that. And that's why it has continued to grow.
In parallel to that as well, and continuing with the threshing fires and the tares, the things that look like wheat, but is actually a weed that you see used in a lot of the parables and stuff. The modern context for some of that I see is in the language. This particular group and others of its ilk like to grab language and twist it, making it look like it's something good, look like it's wheat. But in actuality, in the way they're using it, the way they've redefined those words that already have definitions, it's just the definitions they've given it, and that's used in their context, it is a tare, it is a weed. That is also part of this is both helping others to avoid some of those dangers, is being able to spot those tares and to know when certain words are being used in a different way. Because I fell for that. I would try to argue with evangelical members, and they were hearing everything I was saying completely differently.
Yes.
Because they had redefined so many of the words that I was trying to use. They literally heard what they wanted to hear, but it wasn't out of like some kind of weird denial and selective hearing. It was literally because they heard the words I said, but it meant something exactly opposite of what was trying to be communicated.
Yeah, and we might actually go through this at some point in the future because I think it would be really fascinating to do it. I think the best recruitment tool that the far Christian right, that the Christian nationalists have had in maybe the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years was the infamous debate between Bill Nye and Ken Ham. I was devastated when I saw this, and I was even further devastated when I saw all of the people thinking that Bill Nye won that debate. And he didn't. And I knew that just because I, again, was raised in the kind of Christianity that he needed to be debating. All he did was prove Ken Ham right over and over and over again. And that's not what people outside of evangelicalism heard.
I know, because after we watched the debate, I was like, "Yeah, he didn't do so well, but it wasn't that bad." Like, I was like trying to talk Charlie down because I don't understand why I was so worked up, and I was just like, it should have gone better. But still, I learning their definition, their
Mhm.
perversion of the definition of the language, and learning how to hear it from their context and
And
going,
then,
"Oh,
yeah. Yeah, I
oh,
walked you through and
yeah,
explained to you, like, here's what he said. This is what they heard. And then
mhm,
later, as their reactions started coming out, it was clear that, yeah, they heard it the way I expected them to hear it. Because again, if you're not talking to somebody in their language, they're never going to hear you and you can hurt your cause more than you can help it. So before we keep going, before we get into this video, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever the platform is you're listening to us on. We do original Christopagan and Druid content Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss a thing because we're going to be going through Holy Week from a Christopagan perspective, and it's going to be really interesting. Let's get started with this video. This is the Wisecrack Americans Invented a New Christianity. Here's why that's terrifying is the name of the video, and he's not wrong. So we're going to go through. We're going to be reacting to this video. I highly recommend you watch the whole thing without interruptions. It's only 13 minutes long. We are going to be interrupting this video and talking a lot. Anyway, let's get started.
Donald Trump is the most Christian president in American history.
And he is, if you understand Christian nationalistic evangelicalism.
Yeah, remember rule number one, what we say, not what we do. It's not about doctrines. And it's not about practice. It's about saying the right magical words.
Go back to our episode, The Reality of Evangelical Practices, where we go into that in detail. So yeah, he really, unfortunately, under their definitions, he really is.
Word with me here, because both times that he was elected, evangelical Christians were one of his most influential and supportive voting blocs. And he hasn't been shy about courting Christians.
God spared my life for a reason.
To a large extent, he's delivered on the promises that he made to his evangelical base. He helped end Roe. He let religious organizations avoid the Affordable Care Act's contraception requirements. Of course, he's systematically wiping out any mention of trans folks, a favorite cudgel of many evangelicals. And to top it off, he signed an executive order declaring an end to anti-Christian bias.
Okay, this one to me is the funniest one here. I've talked about this on the podcast several times. That to me is the most important thing that he did. I think it was a mistake for him to end Roe. I think it's a mistake because it was one of the few things holding this coalition together. We're starting to see the coalition slowly drifting apart because conservative Catholics could sit at a table with a right-wing evangelical Christian nationalist because they were unified in their opposition to Roe v. Wade. What we have started seeing is those right-wing Catholics have started drifting out of the fold again because there's no longer that unified center of gravity that is holding them together. So I think this was a tactical mistake on their part. And I don't think that they actually expected it to happen. I think that it was an accident of, oops, we did too good stacking the court. You can see that in the way that they kind of backtracked and tried to backtrack very quickly in rhetoric, not in actions, in rhetoric after this happened. This Christian persecution thing is vital to understanding this form of New American Christianity. Its main go-to line is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, where Jesus said, "Blessed are you when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for yours is the kingdom of heaven." This is cited all of the time and is often used as a way of saying, see, look, you made somebody angry, therefore you're doing God's work, which I mean, if you read anything else that Jesus said, you realize how twisted that is of reading in these churches. This is how that's taught. And so I remember when I was a kid, when they did the pray at the polls, we were encouraged as children, or we were children. I would have been in middle school when this started. So we were encouraged as children to not only bring our Bibles to school every day, but to always put them on our desk so that people could see that we had them, because it's very, very performative. You know, everything that Jesus is against in the Sermon on the Mount, you know, don't pray in public, don't make a show of your faith, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, because whatever you do publicly, surely you've already reaped your reward. All, you know, all the stuff Jesus was against, and we were encouraged to do. And the pray at the polls movement, we were encouraged to try to get as many kids as we could to go out before school every day to make a circle around the flagpole and pray. I had qualms about this at the time because I felt that this was making an idol out of the flag, and I didn't understand why we would be praying with our hands around a flag. And they kept trying to explain, you know, it's a symbol of the country and you're just putting God's covering, you know, blah, blah, blah. And kids across the United States did this. We were encouraged to do this with the full expectation. Like, I remember sitting in Sunday school and them telling us, now, don't be surprised if anyone hits you, throws you to the ground, and starts kicking you. Know that you're being hit for the Lord.
Yeah.
Now,
Intentional trolling.
it's not really intentional trolling. It's hoping to invoke that kind of response. It's designed to get you as a small child. Because again, I'm sorry, middle school, you're a kid, you are a child.
Yeah.
And they're trying to burn this into your brain already that you were persecuted. And it backfired because I went to a very liberal school and we went around the flagpole. We prayed. Nobody cared. Everybody just went about their business. Nobody cared. And that was very defeatist for us because we were trying to figure out what we did wrong.
Yeah, because in this mindset, if you're not attacked, you did something wrong,
Yes.
and you're also not holy, you're not holy enough, I guess. It's within this mindset. Yeah, it reminds me of in Oklahoma when they wanted to put the 10 Commandments out in front of the courthouse. It's that same mindset. They're doing this to provoke. They wanted protesters to come out here. They wanted people to vandalize the statue of the 10 Commandments so they, in their mindset, could be validated that they were good Christians. And the whole thing fell apart because instead of doing the behavior sought for, the Satanic Temple turned around and said, oh, wonderful, we get to put religious things in public spaces. Here's this lovely Baphomet that we're going to put right next to it because it's equal. And said, good on you, and encouraged the evangelical behavior to justify basically trolling them right back. The whole thing fell apart because they suddenly went, oh no, we can't allow religious things in government space because, you know, separation of church and state is correct, and just quietly backed out.
That's why that worked, because they trolled the troll back and
Yep.
get the response that they wanted. Now, right now, they're trying to clarify their interpretation of the First Amendment so that it does not cover Satanists.
Yeah.
It may have been introduced in Kansas, but I'm not entirely sure that it's actually been introduced anywhere, but I know that they are workshopping legislation that would basically define who would be eligible for First Amendment religious protections. And they're trying to do that so that those kinds of protests can't happen anymore. But this feeds in this right here, starting a protecting religious and an anti-Christian bias. Remember, they have to feel persecuted. And since this movement was co-opted by not just right-wing ideology, but by corporate interest. Remember, I was taught in school, in Sunday school and in church, that global warming was a satanic plan to control what you could buy or sell. It's how you get to the mark of the beast. You convince people that there's climate change so that you can then control what people buy and sell. It's a way to bring about the Antichrist, right? That only helps the oil companies and the coal companies and what have you, right? The corporate ideologies have funded a lot of the religious transformation. We're going to get to that here. But when they're talking about anti-Christian bias, I need you all to hear that for what it means, because everybody saw that. And the reaction was, huh, that's funny. And you're going to hear Michael do this in a second, that Christians are the least persecuted group in the United States. It's going to go through statistics. That is the wrong way to do this. What they mean by that is if you are opposing them factually, such as with teaching evolution in school, without teaching their version of the founding of this country, which is very different from the actual history. If you do anything, if you teach global warming or that the climate is changing, basically, if you teach science that threatens a company's bottom line, that is seen as anti-Christian bias.
Even teaching that misogyny is a bad thing
Yes.
is seen as anti-Christian bias. And also cultural equality,
Yes.
cultural diversity is seen as anti-Christian bias from their perspective.
So you have to understand, because actual Christian persecution does not happen in this country, no one actually persecutes Christians in this country. This term has been redefined to mean teaching anything or supporting anything that we disagree with is persecution. That's problematic in so many ways. Okay, let's continue. Going back just a little bit, let's continue with this.
Signed an executive order declaring an end to anti-Christian bias. Because, of course, when you think of the most persecuted religious group in the U.S., evangelical Christians really leap to mind. Now, Trump and Christianity have always seemed like an odd partnership.
Old Testament guy or New Testament guy? Probably equal.
Jesus constantly talked about loving your enemies, supporting the least of these, living in a way filled with love.
Sell all your belongings and give the money to the poor.
Okay, I'm going to stop here for just 1 second. This is, again, a problem that people like me who actually believe in Jesus, people from the outside looking in, right, think if you are a Christian, Christ being in the name, you actually follow the teachings of Jesus. And that makes a certain amount of logical sense. Now, remember, this American evangelical Christian nationalist movement, the only thing you have to believe in is the virgin birth. Why? Because it's easy for somebody to come at you when you say, I believe Jesus was born of a virgin. If you want to do your part in fighting right wingers, stop arguing that. Stop arguing about that, because you're proving to them, see, I'm right, because somebody's arguing with it. Okay. So the virgin birth is held up high. And of course, the crucifixion and resurrection at the end. Everything else is generally not taught. You will go to church in these churches and rarely hear Jesus quoted. And when you do, he's quoted out of context and twisted to mean whatever they want him to say. He is never read in context. This is very dangerous for them because, Jesus' whole message was take care of the poor, like the entire wisdom tradition before him. So this is not a problem for them. This is something that an outsider looks at and goes, this makes no sense. Wouldn't you actually obey the teachings of Jesus? The teachings of Jesus are not taught in most Christian churches. They're not there to follow the teachings of Jesus. They're there to follow the example of Jesus, which is to be a menace, because the only real parts that you talk about is his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, the scourging of the temple, and his crucifixion. Those are the only parts other than the nativity story. They skip everything else. There's the only parts of the story that you get. So this Jesus is a rabble rouser that they are following. So yeah, you should be throwing over the tables. You should be making a mess. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing we should add in at this point, keep in mind, this evangelical Christian nationalism movement really subtly pushed and encourages solipsistic behavior and mindset. They really encourage that and push that.
Solipsism, if you're not familiar with this term, is a stage everyone goes through when they're 2 years old and learn the concept of me. Me, me,
Yep.
me, 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 me. When you see that little child running around, me, 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 mine, mine. It's a stage of development that most people grow out of, and that this American evangelical Christian nationalist movement is encouraging people to stay in.
Or revert back to.
Yes.
Yeah. They really encourage that because the whole thing is it's all about me and their individual personal perspective. This way, a thing that happens that's not part of their personal story can be just dismissed easily at hand.
Yep.
Which is why, like, the whole persecution's like, well, of course, they'll go, well, I know that lady in Kentucky who clearly broke the law.
And violated the
Not-
teachings of Jesus and Paul, by the way.
And Paul, by not following the civil government authority as far as gay marriage goes, and refused to do her job when she took a job and was working in a position where she had to do that because she was working for the government. and then got sued. So some of them that know her are just like, see, Christians are persecuted. She's being sued for being a good Christian.
Well, Jesus and Paul both taught that render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and unto God the things that are God's. So she was there to issue a certificate. She should have issued the certificate. And Paul said, if you were at a dinner and they offered you food that had been sacrificed to an idol, you know that there is nothing in the idol. Do not offend your host. Eat with them.
Her host was the state. She was acting as an agent of the state for the state and was supposed to do what the state wanted her to do.
Paul also said that state power is always instituted by God and God alone, for the state itself to be the wielder of God's justice in this world, and that we are to obey all of the laws of the states we are in. We can talk about that on a future episode on whether I agree with Paul or not.
Yeah.
You can tell from my tone, I don't. But
yeah,
they're in violation of the teachings of Paul and Jesus there. Okay, let's get back to the video.
All your belongings and give the money to the poor.
Mr. Trump, well, his hobby of extramarital affairs and shady business deals doesn't exactly scream Christian value.
Is she a wife? You know what? I would say she's a beautiful woman, but if I did say that, my political career, you're not allowed to say that.
You know, the very mention of things like love and mercy seem to make him squirm.
They may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals.
So how has he become a hero, even a leader for American Christians? Well, there's two people who can help us explain the rise of Trump and Christianity. One is Friedrich Nietzsche. The other is Paula White.
Okay. We're going to talk a lot about Paula White and Nietzsche. Nietzsche is one of the most misread, misrepresented, and misunderstood people in the history of philosophy for the following reason. And I say this with love to Philosophy Tube, who did a multi-episode teardown. Abigail, I love you, but you misunderstood to me what the purpose and value of Nietzsche is. Nietzsche was the canary in the coal mine. We had two of these who lived at roughly the same time, and they were Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche. They both got to the same point in their philosophy, and then Kierkegaard believed that we should leap into faith. In other words, just trust that things will be okay and something will catch us on the other side of nihilism. So just jump into nihilism. And Nietzsche looked into the void and said, there's stuff in there staring at me, had a panic attack about it, and died in an insane asylum because he drove himself mad. They really are the canaries in the coal mine of people coping with modernity and the onset of post-modernity. They're in this place where all of the grand stories are falling apart around them. How do you function in a society when those grand stories break? Now, Nietzsche, who I am not here to defend, he was extremely problematic on so many levels, as are most historical figures. So don't think I'm giving him a pass on things that he said and did. But Nietzsche, remember, is in this time period trying to figure out how to break through this nihilism that he sees on the horizon, this meaninglessness that he sees on the horizon. And he sees a certain kind of nationalism coming. And this is where I think misreadings of him come in the differentiation he makes between his ultimate man and his Ubermensch. The Overman rejects all of those claims that society is putting on them, rejects nationalism, rejects all of the rules that this society is trying to form around them, all of the great stories, all the great man history, rejects all of that and becomes a wheel rolling from their own center and kind of sets out very, if I can use the language of the internet, very Sigma male energy, right? Just kind of goes off on their own and walks away from this grand plan. Whereas the ultimate man or the final man, depending on how you want to translate him into English, is subsumed by it. For every pain, there is a pill. For every worry, there is a pill. For every problem, there is a solution that is handed to them. This is actually the person that Nietzsche's philosophy was mostly against. Who are the people that support the creation of the ultimate man, the final man, the person that Nietzsche believed would be the end of civilization? It was what he called the preachers of death, who were primarily for him the Lutherans in the evangelical church that existed in Germany at the time. And so that's what we're going to get into here. I just wanted to give a little preamble on Nietzsche because he has become a hot topic lately because a certain Canadian likes to quote him a lot without understanding any of the words that he's reading.
Well, we're on Nietzsche for a minute here too. So many get exposed to Nietzsche just talking about the ultimate man or the overman, and they don't have the added context of the process, the learning and growth process where you go into the desert as the camel. You're taking on all of the knowledge and learning that you can, and you face the dragon thou shalt, which is all of the previous rules and dictates, and you then become that wheel rolling from within yourself. When people have that context to add in, they can understand the differences between the other two then. Because the question is, are you the camel? Are you the dragon thou shalt? Or are you just sitting there going, but you must follow the rules. Here's the rules. Follow the rules. Do the rules. Be the rules. Are you the wheel? Are you actually holding yourself up to your own internal standards, constantly shaping and molding your own internal standards that you then hold yourself up to?
Also, I think the biggest missed thing in Nietzsche, just to finish that topic off, is that he failed living up to his own philosophy. And that's what destroyed him. He went into the desert to fight the dragon, to use his own analogy for this, and lost. He could not see a path forward. And that's what destroyed him.
Yep.
And led him into the deep, cavernous depression that would end up taking his life. The problem with people reading Nietzsche is they look to Nietzsche for solutions. Nietzsche was diagnosing the problem, and it was the problem that he himself was living through. Nietzsche doesn't get to solutions. He got to, here's a method I believe will get us to a solution. And then he was unable to perform that act himself.
Yeah.
He went out into the desert and he died in the desert. Not literally, but
not literally.
The ultimate man always stays learning. He always stays back domesticated. Yeah. Remember, he is trying to diagnose a problem and he is seeking a solution. He never gets to the solution. And I do think a lot of his problems that he saw are still here. But the hardest thing for me hearing people talk about Nietzsche is thinking that he actually came up with solutions. He died trying and didn't get there. Okay, let's continue the video.
The longer the dance, the more bees she gets around. So Queen Bee starts going into this frenzy.
If you haven't heard of her, just wait. She's more fun than a barrel of monkeys. Okay, let's start by clarifying which brand of Christians have anointed Trump as the second coming. Now, some of his most vocal supporters have been Christian nationalists, and specifically white Christian nationalists. And it's easy to listen to the news and feel like these white Christian nationalists are some shadowy conspiratorial society threatening our democracy's very existence. Well, you wouldn't be totally wrong to think that, but Christian nationalism itself is a sort of debatable moniker. Researchers tend to disagree about what Christian nationalism even is or the degree to which it functions as a coherent ideology.
Okay, this is the problem that I have with academia. This right here, as somebody who grew up in this was the main mode of evangelicalism for at least since the 70s, when you start having the rise of the moral majority. You see this with Anita Bryant, start bringing this in with her crusade against gay teachers. You see this start forming. Yes, it has roots prior to this, but this is where the modern form that we're talking about really comes into being. One of the things that I'm planning on doing is making some videos, either that I'll probably share on the YouTube channel and over on TikTok. I have Pat Robertson's White Christian Nationalist Bible. It was a gift given to me when it came out, and it actually teaches you how Christians are supposed to have dominion over the earth and the country. This is core to a certain variety of Christians that if you grew up Christian and you don't know what a TBN is, if you don't know the names Paul and Jan Crouch, now you might be too young for Paul and Jan, but I still hear people talking about Paul and Jan that are in these circles, even though I think both of them have been dead for quite some time. I know Paul has. The PTL Club, the 700 Club, your Jack Van Impe's, your Late Great Planet Earth, all of these books. This is something that goes a long ways back and created a specific core of evangelical Christianity that gave rise to the televangelists. And it's the televangelists that gave rise to the podcast evangelists and the streamer evangelists and the TikTok evangelists. They're from this very particular school of thought, and there is nothing but Christian nationalism here. We had two flags in our church. One of them was the American flag right up at the altar, on each side, we had a flag. One was the American flag, and one was what we called the Christian flag, which was a red, white, and blue flag that had a cross up in the corner. So this is something that's been around for a while. And if you're not looking at this particular strain that has made itself very powerful, yeah, you're not going to find this in your run-of-the-mill Lutheran church. Maybe a lot of the Presbyterian churches are not going to have this in there, some of the Methodist churches, but some of the members, because it's a para movement. It's not core to anything but maybe the Southern Baptist Convention. It's a parachurch movement that has members in every congregation. And that's what makes it dangerous. I hope that you have found this enlightening. I hope that this has helped you. We're going to have to break this up into 2 episodes. So check back tomorrow for the second half of this investigation into modern American false Christianity and how to cope with it. There's a lot to talk about here. On tomorrow's episode, we're going to be talking about Paula White and the modern evangelicals and how they get brought into this whole situation. So definitely check back for that. I'll give you a hint. There's merch involved, not that we're selling, but that they are, because, Jesus, it's going to be fun. Anyway, I would love to know your thoughts about this movement and how we can fight against it. Please, if you're listening to us on YouTube, on Spotify, or on CreationsPaths, leave a comment letting us know what you think is the best way forward here and how we can really make things better in the long run. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, you can, but they don't notify us. So leave a comment there anyway, because engagement is magic. And then head over to CreationsPaths.com, click on chat, and there you can leave us a comment and we will be able to see it and get back to you. While you're there, if you happen to have a few dollars you can pass our way, we offer monthly and annual memberships. You can also support us on Ko-fi and Patreon. I am CE Dorset on both. You can also support us through the Cash app, hashtag CreationsPaths. Thank you so much to everybody who does that. It really does mean the world to us. So as we're heading out today, I think there's only one thing that we can do. O most Holy Spirit, whom Jesus promised would guide us to all faith and all truth, and that would remind us of the things that he had said, guide us through these times where we are struggling against those who work in Jesus' name to bring evil and injustice into this world. Help us and guide us that we may find our way. Amen.
Amen.